Today, on Energy Contact, we are going back, way back to our very first moments in the womb, to see how we're programmed to separate, and to see how early we start thinking, and how early we start making decisions. We have those thoughts and decisions, and they shape our physical and emotional selves, deliberately, but unconsciously. Well, today, we're going to get conscious, and then we're going to take control of the self-building process. So be alert, get yourselves together, and stay right here, because it's coming up right now on Energy Contact.
And I ain't gonna worry, and I ain't gonna complain. I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping, and I'll keep my mind on better things. I ain't gonna worry, and I ain't gonna complain. I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping, and I'll keep my mind on better things. Just keep my mind on better things.
Hello and welcome to Energy Contact. My name is Joseph Willenbrink. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you to the production staff here in the studio for helping me get my message out to you. Energy Contact is a series that I'm presenting to you as a public service. It's about attaining perfect health, growth, self-improvement, happiness, and realizing your full potential. It's designed to present you a new way of seeing yourself and a new way of seeing the world around you. We're talking about things that have to do with making an energetic contact with ourselves internally and with our environment. There's no difference between the body, the mind, the spirit, the emotion, the intellect, the ego. There's no difference between mass and energy. Goodness, there's something about us that loves to separate, to categorize, to pull out one little part and look at it separate from everything else. But in fact, all that health and growth and self-improvement we're talking about will take place when we do just the opposite. When we put these things together, when we make an energetic contact between the physical world and the unseen one. We're presenting on these programs a brand new paradigm that is thousands of years old. We're presenting extraordinary topics for ordinary people. Let's move forward with that right away, and let's bring up our first slide. Everyone please know that I am not a doctor, and this show is nowhere near a medical advice show. It's not even close. If you're looking for medical advice, you're in the wrong place. I call myself an energy healer or a chakra healer. So do a lot of other people. But state, federal, and local governments absolutely do not. And it's important that you know that. There's a lot of important stuff on this slide. We'll leave it up there for a second. Please read it carefully and with awareness, if you will. And when you've got that information down, if you would, please locate a pencil and paper. Now would be a good time to do that. And here's why you want to. At the end of this show, we're going to roll some credits. And on those credits, there's going to be contact information for me. Now, I'm sort of hoping that perhaps something I tell you today might inspire you to want to contact me with a question, a comment, whatever, and I'll be delighted to hear from you. But in order to do that, you're going to need that contact information. In order to get that, you're going to need a pencil and paper. There'll be plenty of time to jot that information down at the end of the show, if you have your pencil and paper ready. All right, let's come back up here. Today's show is show number 6. And if you're joining me for the first time today, thank you. Thanks and welcome. These shows are sequential. They do build, and as the series progresses further, they'll build more and more. But I'm doing my very best to make each show have a lot of value on a standalone basis. And today's show does. So, if it is your first time joining me today, and if what you see piques your interest, then I will invite you to look for those earlier shows. They'll either be airing here on this channel or perhaps in different areas where your friends live. And if you look for them, I'll appreciate it. And now, it's the time of the show where we introduce my co-host. Let's get Slim on camera. Slim is here for a reason. There's my buddy Slim. Since we're investigating what energy contacts in the physical self, we have to know a few things, don't we? We have to know something about energy. And this program is certainly about energy. But all that energy out there somewhere, out there as some nebulous concept, does us no good whatsoever. Energy does us no good until we bring it into contact and understand what the energy contacts. Slim is here to help us understand what that is. Each of us has an inner Slim, and I invite and encourage you to get in touch with yours. Remember, a body without energy is just a corpse. An energy without a body, well, it might be a number of cool things, but none of them are human. All right, so previously on Energy Contact, we have been talking about how thought creates form. How, as Einstein told us, energy and mass are interchangeable, indistinguishable. How our body then is frozen energy, just like ice is frozen steam. We've seen, in fact, a bit of how that energy created our bodies in the first place. We have looked at the forces that create and manage life. We have seen internal factors, the forces that animate us: breath, pulse, frequency, rhythm, vibration, wave, constant motion, those things that make us something other than a corpse. And we've seen the external factors: gravity and entropy, the pressures, the joys, the bumps and bruises, the traumas and serenities, the kisses and hugs of life. We've looked at atoms over the past few shows, those bags of nothing that we're all made of. And we've seen how people are made up of these identical substances, and yet we all look and behave differently. We take an identical bump and we respond differently. We saw how that builds into the core of ourselves. And so, through all of this, we're becoming aware that the reason we have problems in our life is because we set ourselves up for them. We set ourselves up for illness and for sadness, for injury, for deterioration, ugliness, whatever it is, we set ourselves up for it. We do it. It's not luck. It's not something outside of us. And so, we can set ourselves up for the good things too. For joy, success, health, happiness, growth, self-improvement. And that's what this show is all about. All right, so today we're going to go back to the womb, even further back than we've gone previously, back to our first moments after conception. We've looked at atoms a lot, but today we're going to look at cells. In fact, we'll see our very first ones, the ones that are already developing in response to those internal forces that animate us. How they divide out, how they separate, and how they specialize. We'll see how your skeleton is not your framework at all. It doesn't support you, you support it. So today we're going to discuss, along with everything else, a lot of anatomy and physiology. We're going to learn just enough of it to understand our energetic selves. Don't worry, we won't get lost in it. We're going to jump around a little bit today too, but we're keeping in mind our main focus of understanding how our energetic self builds our physical self, and vice versa. How there's no difference between the body, the mind, the spirit, the emotion, the intellect, the ego. There's no difference between mass and energy. There's no difference between anything. Everything's the same. And so they're all interactively and iteratively building each other. And when we truly understand how we've used all of these things, these internal forces, these external forces, to build ourselves, then we'll see how we can rebuild. This time to our specifications, to the way we want to be. Plenty to do today. But first, before we go on, everybody take a second, sit back, take a deep breath, because we have reached the part of our show where we get to visualize, where we get to take our virtual field trip, our journey in our mind's eye. And for today's trip, we're going to go to a biotech lab. We're going to go to a biotech lab where they do cloning. And so there we are in the lab, and right over there is the subject we're the most interested in. It's a sheep, a fully grown, fully developed, healthy adult sheep that is a clone, that is the product of one other sheep. And so we say to the scientists, man, that's fascinating. How did you get and assemble all those cells from all those different positions? Did you have to pull out stomach cells and put them in a mold somewhere down here, and head cells and put them in a mold up here? And the scientist just laughs. He says, oh no, that's not the way it works at all. All we do is we just scrape a toothpick full of cells, and they do all the separating and dividing out by themselves. They make all those organs and bones and things all by themselves. And we say, really? Well, how do they do that? How can that toothpick full of cheek cells know how to be a stomach down here, and know how to be an eyeball up there, and know how to be hooves way down there? How can that happen? It's amazing. And the scientist says to us, well, the template The entire information for every part of his body, the whole information set, is in every cell of his body. Your body works that way too. Every single cell is a hologram for the entire being. Every piece of us contains all of us. Fascinating. Hold that thought. Let's go from there right to Slim today. We have always been taught incorrectly about the skeleton, and we want to correct that right off the bat, right before we go any further here. Let's get Slim on camera. We're going to take a peek at Slim. We have always been told that our bones are our structure, that they give us our strength and form, that they hold us together. We're told that bones are a frame onto which everything else is hung and strung, like the ornaments of a Christmas tree. We're told that our skeleton is like the metal frames of high-rise buildings. But how can this be? Let's get a little closer up on Slim, and you'll see something that's not in you. You're going to see screws and connectors, pins, wires, rivets. Can you see these little things up here? They're all over Slim. Well, where are they on your skeleton? So let's say we think about this for a little while, and we decide to call the skeleton manufacturer. We say, hey, wait a minute, we wanted an authentic model. These wires and rivets, they aren't lifelike at all. They aren't on our bodies. Why did you put them on poor Slim? The manufacturer replies, well, because if we didn't put them there, the skeleton would fall apart. Aha! So our bones don't hold us together, we hold them together. The bones don't support the body supports the bones. That's why Slim needs these bolts and screws, and you don't. We've had it upside down and backwards all these years, and so did our anatomy teacher. All right, so bones don't hold us together. They hold us apart. They're like the girders of a suspension bridge. They're spacers. Bones prevent muscles from over-contracting, from over-pulling. Without them, our hands, for example, would just sort of spring up into our shoulders, wouldn't they? The bones provide the push. They're the counterbalance. They're like a seesaw. Remember when you were a kid and that smart little kid on the other side of the seesaw jumped off? Well, that's what happens when we lose our counterbalance. Slim provides us that. Want to see what Slim would look like without all of his rivets and bolts and screws? Let's bring up a slide and we'll take a peek. Here's what Slim would look like. Can we get that? There he is. He looks like somebody that needs to pull himself together. Actually, it'd be even worse than this, because these bones here, they're at least laid out in order. The law of entropy dictates that Slim would be just in a big disorderly pile. Well, hey, why don't we look like that? We don't look like that because we have things that hold our bones together. And it's not metal hardware either. All right, now let's come back up here. Those bones provide us length and empty space, room for the holes, for the emptiness, for the voids, for all that nothingness. But wait a minute. That's where we started with atoms. Nothingness. Remember, we said there were bags of nothing. So that's what we got. That's what we got to work with in our bodies. Nothing. There's no mass to speak of. Still, something has to organize all of that nothing into something that isn't random, that isn't all apart, that isn't just a big pile or a big blob. Something has to work to bring order to what entropy would do otherwise. Our muscles pull us together. Our bones push us apart. We'll talk a lot more about muscles in future shows, but for now, here's all you need to know about them. The reason our bones hold together is because our muscles, along with some other things we'll see in a bit, they pull them together. And the reason our muscles move us is because our bones push them apart, provide them a fulcrum upon which to move. Now, this is the opposite of everything that we've been told by very smart people all of our lives. Very smart people whose opinions we trust. Sometimes we trust those people with our lives. Why would they be telling us these things? Don't they know? Do you think they're lying? And for that matter, so what? Why do we need to know anyway? Well, we want to know because that knowledge constitutes our empowerment, the foundation of the new paradigm of your complete health, your growth, your happiness, your self-improvement. All those things, we are going to spell them out quite clearly. the meaning of life. It's coming up right here on Energy Contact. But before I let it out, before I divulge it, hang on. We have to look at a little bit more biology. Let's review what we know about atoms and cells. Let's bring up our next slide. Here's a slide you remember that you've seen from previous shows. Atoms are the basic building blocks of everything. They are the basis of the material world. You'll recall that we discussed the similarity of the tiny atom, that's it there on the left, and the huge solar system there on the right. Remember with these drawings 3 points. 1, those circles don't exist. They're just there to show you how those dots are traveling. 2, everything except the dots are nothing. Absolutely nothing. And 3, the scale is way, way off. There's a lot more empty space than that. All right, let's move to our next slide and we'll take another look at atoms. You and I are made up of basically these 3 things for the most part. It's interesting. You know what else is? Well, among a million other things, vodka, a car tire, a charcoal briquette, and the padding of the chair you're sitting on. All right, so that's atoms, all identical. What about cells? Let's move forward to the next slide and you'll see something that looks a little different. We haven't spoken about cells yet on Energy Contact, but as we say back home, we're a-fixin' to. If atoms are exactly alike, cells are very different. They're completely different. Cells are alive. They have individuality. They're like snowflakes. No two are exactly alike. We can envision cells looking a lot more like those vitamin E soft gels than they do like bags of nothing. They pulse and they divide. The walls can be thick or thin. They choose whether to cave into pressure or to push back. All right, let's come back here. The physicist says we're made up of atoms. The biologist says we're made up of cells. Well, who's right? Well, they both are. Cells are made up of atoms. But cells have personality. They have intelligence, and they have body intellect. Remember that word, body intellect. It's an extremely important word, and we're going to talk about the body intellect a lot in future shows. But for now, we're getting ready to move on from cells and atoms. Although before we do, let's bring up another slide. We'll bring up a slide for my fellow geeks in the crowd. And just look at some numbers, just to help you get a little bit better feel about relative sizes. You see that an atom is about 100,000 times larger than its nucleus, but the nucleus is almost all of its weight. The rest of it, all nothing. A person's about 100,000 times larger than a cell, which is about 100,000 times larger than an atom. As we've discussed, we are mostly carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Here's some big numbers. There are about 10 trillion, that's what all those numbers are there, atoms, cells, in the human body. And look at that next number. There are about 7 gazillion atoms in the human body. That is 7,000 trillion. That means if you do the math, there's about 700 trillion atoms per cell, give or take a billion or two. And yet, even so, cells are still much too little to see without a microscope. All right, let's come back here. So, atoms are microcosms of the universe. We saw that in our solar system example. And cells, on the other hand, are sort of microcosms of the individual. All the information in every part of us is in each individual cell. How else would that cloning be possible? If this weren't the case, when we went to clone a sheep, what we'd get instead of an adult sheep, we'd just get a big adult sheep's cheek, wouldn't we? All right, so that's atoms and cells. Let's go back to where they originally formed in us. Now we're going to go back to our conception. We start in our conception as a zygote, and almost immediately we become this little amorphous, unintelligible blob of cells. Everything's the same. Everything's the same in us. But all of a sudden, something happens. We begin to separate. We begin to differentiate. We begin to long to be individual. About the second week of our embryonic existence, a circular mass of cells called the embryonic disc forms. So, within a day or two, that then subdivides. It forms into 2 distinct levels, an inside level and outside level. And then another 2 or 3 days later, a third layer forms, a middle layer, so that one zygote turns into a blob, then into 3 distinct layers, separate from each other. And all that happens within the first 16 days after our conception. They're called germ layers, but germ is in core, like wheat germ, not germ as in like bacteria or something like that. Everything in our body, everything in your and my body today, comes from one of those 3 layers. And all this is going on inside mom, and she doesn't even know she's pregnant yet. Depending on her lifestyle, she might not have stopped smoking and drinking yet. She might not have put down the crack pipe yet. Do you think all that information is imprinting in our circuits? All right, so that first cell becomes millions of cells by continually dividing. And somehow it develops into arms that know they aren't legs, eyes that don't try to smell or don't try to hear. They know better. But let's look at something else. Let's bring up another slide. Early in the womb, when our genetic fingerprints is being stamped out in us, all the cells touch each other. They're all the same things. This is a picture of cell division, but you see where those cells are going. Sure, before they divide, they're making energetic contact, but they're making physical contact too. Before these germ layers even form, the cells that are the prototype for every part of us are the same. What will be brain cells are in contact with what will be our guts, and so on. That's how it is with that cloned sheep too. How do all these things know how to separate and differentiate? Well, that's what cloning is about. That's what the stem cell research that you hear about is all about. All right, let's come back up here. We are imprinting all of that information into our body intellect, that body intellect we mentioned. All of these parts, all imbued with the same genetic fingerprint, and mom hasn't even considered buying her first pregnancy test yet. Fascinating. Okay, so we're going to look at those layers a little bit more now. We've got an inside layer, an outside layer, and a middle layer. Scientists give them names. They call them ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm. Don't let those names throw you off. All it means is outside layer, inside layer, and middle layer. Scientists, just like every other profession, they like to dream up a bunch of fancy jargon. It just makes them feel more important. Every single layer of you and I comes from one of those 3 layers. So let's look at them a little more. First, the ectoderm, the outside layer. The outside layer becomes skin. It becomes nails, tooth enamel, mammary glands in some of us, nervous system, and the brain. Ectoderm defines us as something different than our environment, something separate. It's the container. It's the shell of the M&M. It keeps the inside in and the outside out. It's the reason that I don't melt into this table that I'm leaning on right now. That's ectoderm. What about endoderm? Endoderm becomes our intestines, our liver, our pancreas, bladder, lungs, trachea, much of the reproductive system. It converts the external environment, the things that the endoderm separates us from, it converts those into us. This stuff right here, it's last week's broccoli. How did it get here? Well, the endoderm made it. It transformed it. So if the ectoderm is our container, the endoderm is that stuff which is contained. It has no real form on its own. It's the stuff, you've seen it on the horror movies, like soft jello. If it was just laying by itself, it would just blob out. All right, but you're thinking now, where's Slim? Where's our buddy Slim? Well, I thought you'd never ask, because that question brings us to our middle layer. Slim is made up of mesoderm. That's our middle layer. Mesoderm becomes bones, muscles, blood, cartilage, tendons, ligaments, fascia, things like that. Some of those terms you don't understand yet. If you don't, we'll investigate them before long. It becomes a few internal organs too, kidneys, heart, gonads, inner teeth, other bits and bips here and there. Mesoderm is what's responsible for providing us form, structure, support, motion, locomotion. That's pretty much all the mesoderm does, and it's the only part of us that does it. Remember the live guy and the dead guy we looked at a few shows ago? We saw that what makes the difference between a living person and a dead person is just motion. It's the invisible forces, those internal forces, that make us move. Well, motion is completely a function of the mesoderm. And so mesoderm, by providing motion, provides life. It does the bidding of the internal forces that animate us. Not only does mesoderm make us alive, but it's the stuff that makes us look different. It fills out all that empty space in a manner that gives us form and individuality. So bones are mesoderm. My buddy Slim here is mesoderm. But remember, bones are not our friend. They don't support us. So, if mesoderm supports us and our bones don't, what does? Well, remember Slim's metal hardware? Slim may be all mesoderm, but there's a lot of mesoderm that Slim doesn't have. It's those other parts, those muscles, those tendons, those ligaments, cartilage, fascias and stuff. The stuff that Slim doesn't have. That's what holds our internal Slim together. And that's why Slim needs bolts and screws, and you don't. All right, let's get back to the so what. Why do we need to know all this? And what does it have to do with our health, growth, happiness, and self-improvement? And for that matter, let's go even further, because it begs a question. Does it mean that all those non-physical things, like attitudes, opinions, beliefs, hopes, dreams, loves, fears, joys, all of those things, they all come from a near identical series of just dry biochemical processes and so on? Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what it means. If thought creates form, then those early layers began thinking before structure and form even appeared. And all that working together iteratively and interactively is what made us. Just like our cloned sheep, every little cell of us holds the information about all of us, the big picture. But all these physical things, these muscles and bones and ectoderms and endoderms, if that's the case, they can't be just physical things. They have to be spiritual things too, energetic things. Well, they are spiritual and they are energetic, and they constitute what makes you a magical, mystical being. A few shows ago, we talked about people who built themselves in different ways. Today, we talked about how cells can collapse or push back, just like those people do. So we see that it begins all at the very cellular level. It's all going on at the very core of you at a time when all you are is a core. And speaking of time, that's all the time we have today. I wish you peace and positive energy and a healthy life in Energy Contact.